Good morning. I'd like to call the Hillsborough County Church Development Council quarterly meeting to order. It's good to see everyone. I hope everyone's staying safe and heeding to everything we have to do. Before we get started, I see Mr. Morrison's hands up. You want to say something now, Mr. Morrison, or that's just you testing your hand?
I was just testing. Let me see if I can take it down.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone on the call that can call the roll? Anyone on the call that can call the roll? Mr. Barton?
Yeah, I guess I don't have my roster with me. Rosemary, are you on? Or Tammy?
She is.
Yes, I'm on, Ron.
Okay, do you happen to have the roster available to you?
Hang on just a minute.
Otherwise, I'll have to do it.
Sir, I can call the roll.
Ron, I have it here as well as
Tammy
Placencia.
got it. Tammy has
Okay,
it.
Tammy, can you do that? Tammy, can you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chairman Miller,
Here.
Ron Barton,
Here.
Bob Morrison,
Here.
Councilman Frank Chilura,
Here.
Mayor Castor,
Here.
Jeff Antonaccio, Jim Bartholomew, Joe Collier,
Here.
Lou Placencia,
I am here, and I also see Jeff Antonaccio and Jim Bartholomew there. So maybe they've been muted.
Oh, I said here. I'm sorry, I was muted. You're right. Thanks, Lou.
got
Here.
it. Commissioner Nate Kilton,
Here.
Richard Gonsmart. Rosemary Perfit,
Here. You hear me, Tammy?
I can hear you, Rosemary. Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Is that it? Tammy, is that it?
Yes, sir. That's it.
Okay. We have a quorum. You should have received a copy of the February 13th, 2020 minutes. Is there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Second.
Who was that? Who made the motion?
Jeff.
Lou. Or Jeff.
Pardon me?
Jeff.
Okay, and second, that sounds like here, Bob Morrison. Any further discussion?
Correct.
We have to have a roll call vote because we can't really do it that well with voices. So we have to have a roll call vote of the members.
Lou Placencia, aye.
Well, no, let the clerk call it. Is she still there?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Please call the roll on the vote.
Yes, sir. Bob Morrison,
Yes.
Frank Chilura,
Yes.
Mayor Castor,
Yes, yes,
Jeff Antonaccio,
Yes.
Jim Bartholomew,
Yes.
Joe Collier,
Yes.
Lou Placencia,
Yes.
Nate Kilton,
Yes.
Richard Gonsmart.
Commissioner Miller votes yes. You didn't call my name.
Commissioner Miller, I'm sorry, sir.
Yes, I vote yes.
We have
The vote,
9.
the motion passes. Okay, thank you, ma'am. I was notified that there is no one for public comment, so we're now moving to administrative report. Mr. Barton.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, TDC members. Appreciate you helping us test drive our first virtual TDC meeting. So we'll have a few speed bumps along the way, but we'll get this thing figured out. And if I could, James, I'll ask you to go ahead and pull up the presentation. For TDC members, you have received ahead of time the agenda for today's meeting. Recognizing that some of these aren't going to project very well in a small, particularly if you're on a laptop, these aren't going to project well. So hopefully you may be able to reference your hard copy in front of you as well. Otherwise, I'll give you the high points associated with this. This is first part of this report's my financial report. So what you see here in the first chart is what we would typically present to you in our TDC meetings. This is our second quarter financial report. So it shows the quarterly transactions in the middle column, our annual budget to the left, and then year to date. A reminder that obviously this ran through March. And so as a result, this pretty much was pre-COVID in terms of a financial report for the TDC. This is, in fact, the 3 cents. I did break them out as well. So, at that juncture, we were probably cruising along fine. We had, our revenue collections were not, significantly impacted up through March. And, we had made our typical contractual expenditures for the Sports Commission, for the Visit Tampa Bay, our other marketing partnerships. And then you'll see down at the bottom, we had not released any funds associated with the Super Bowl host committee obligations for the Super Bowl. Nor have we moved forward yet with Plant City on their sports facility project. And we had fully dispersed for the year the Tampa Sports Authority soccer complex operating support. So that's kind of where we were at the end of the second quarter. We're very quickly kind of eyeball year to date and see that we had about 10 million in revenue. So the far right-hand column. We had 10 million in revenue collected and about 8.5 million, 8.7 in total cost, but 8.5 million in contractual expenditures made. James, could you go to the next slide? What we've done here, and I think it was probably even more so given the events of the pandemic, I wanted to report to you kind of real time. So this is second quarter plus April and May. So it's 2 months in to the third quarter, and we've tried to go real time with where we are in the circumstances. Again, you can look down through here, but I'll quickly just go to the right-hand column. So what you'll see year to date, recognizing that we had both April and May, and those were impacted COVID months to our TDT. Our revenues are just short of 12 million, and our expenditures down at the bottom are about, just 10.4 million, with expenses 10.7. So still got our nose above water, but one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about is obviously the fact that the Super Bowl host committee is those expenses are going to be addressed when there's more clarity with the NFL. But for all intents and purposes, and you'll hear me talk about this when I share with you the draft for the FY21 budget, we're expecting obviously just to roll that money over, and we've coordinated that with Rob Higgins as well. So that's not going to be detrimental to them. Those expenses obviously have not been incurred. So the good news is for the current fiscal year, that $2 million won't get applied to our expenditure column. Also, thanks to Commissioner Nate Kilton and Bill McDaniel with Plant City. When this first started, I reached out to them to kind of see where they were on their project. They have started initiatives on it, but really are in the early stages of design. And we're great team partners in recognizing that it was not in either of our best interests to move forward aggressively with a construction project with such uncertainty. And so they've been very gracious in recognizing that they would not make any requests associated with this project. And in fact, in their own regard, they've kind of hit a little bit of the pause button or the slow down button related to that project. And so the good news is on this particular table, that outstanding $2.5 million between Super Bowl and the Plant City Sports Complex will not be calls on our revenue. And just by working with the entities and the circumstances that we're in. So we'll continue to monitor this month to month. So that's the 3 cent. James, if you could go to the next table. So again, I repeat, this is actually the 6 cent through the second quarter. And if you remember, there are three major elements to the 6 cent. There's the additional marketing dollars for Visit Tampa Bay. There's the Tampa Convention Center capital match program. And then there are the cultural and attraction capital projects. So if you'll see down, I'm going to skip to the expense side first. So if you look towards the bottom of the table, the budgets for those were $2 million for this convention center, just short of $1 million for CVB, right at $1 million. And I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong column. $2 million on the left-hand side for the convention center, $1.9 million for the Visit Tampa Bay, and a little over $1 million for cultural and asset capital projects. That was the budget. Then switching over to the right-hand side, year to date, you can see the revenues that we've collected. Again, I remind you, no significant adverse impacts up through the end of the second quarter because that was up to March. So we had collected $3.4 million and we had dispersed about $3 million. The big release there obviously was the matching grant with the city on the convention center. Their projects have moved forward, and so we had released those funds. And so we were just tracking at second quarter about $400,000 above our expenses. James, could you go to the next one? So this is a 6 cent adding in April and May. So these are the reflection of the negative impacts of COVID. So you can again see over a year to date, the collections obviously start to fall off, and I'll show you those tables in a minute. So 3.9 million, just short of 4 million in revenue collections. Again, the expenses, we've made some disbursements, and we're at 3.3. So again, 6 cents is still favorable on the revenue to expenses. We've made one of the big releases with the convention center itself, and we're monitoring this one pretty much month to month because we don't want to get upside down on this one just because it's the 1 cent. But all in all, again, from a financial perspective, we're literally watching it, month to month. We're working with Visit Tampa Bay and Sports Commission and others about what we can release as we go forward. And we're just kind of trying to adjust on the fly related to that. James, could you go to the next slide? So this is the collections data. This table is the full 6 cent. So again, these are just the hard numbers. The yellow highlighted for September of 19 is when we started collecting the 6 cent. So clearly when we start rolling over into FY20, and anytime we look at the totals, we got to recognize that it's 1 cent more in the collection process than before September of 2019. So you can see the April FY20 drop off. And again, I would encourage you not to compare to the column before because that was a 5 cent versus a 6 cent. And then you can see the May. More illustrative is the next table, James. Here you can see the percentages. So what we've shown you here is the 3 cent because we're used to seeing that. That's a significant part of our budget discussions and performance evaluations. And so here's the 3 cent. So this is an apples to apples when we look at comparing to previous year. And again, we note the yellow, but it's not for the 6 cent, but it's not in this data. So you can see in March, we actually had collections of favorable to previous year. And then April and May start to show the effects of the COVID pandemic. And we can see a 50% reduction over previous year for April and an 81% reduction for May over previous year. We're running at about just under 16% negative. And as I said, there's nothing for us to do except, monitor month to month, try to make sure we stay current with where our revenues are and watch our expenses. James, could you go to the next? And all of these charts are obviously going to look the same, but we do graph the 3 cent, the 6 cent, and the 4th and 5th cent. And so, the trajectories are all going to be identical. But the 3 cent, as I'd mentioned, for the year, we're negative 15%. You can see kind of graphically the depiction of the fall off, particularly for April and May. The 4th and 5th, the same. And then James, could you go to the next? And then the 6th. And again, at the bottom of the table, you can actually see the dollar amounts. But so I know these three are a little redundant because they're going to have the same trajectories, but wanted to make sure we shared those with you. James, could you go to the next slide? So I'm going to stop there for a second. And before I kind of transition to a conversation about the FY21 budget, are there any questions about the financial report, either on our obviously revenue collections information or our financial report on expenditures?
Mr. Barton, I don't see any hands at this point.
Okay.
Do we have to accept that quarterly financial report?
That would be good.
Okay, so I see no hands. When you make a motion, please state your name, and if you make a second, please state your name. So I see no questions concerning the quarterly financial report. So the motion to adopt the quarterly financial report.
Lou Placencia, so moved.
Is there a second?
Jane Castor, second.
There's a motion and a second to accept the financial report. See no further discussion. Please call the roll.
Council Chairman Miller,
Yes.
Council Member Morrison,
Yes.
Council Member Chalura,
Yes.
Council Member Castor,
Yes. Yes.
Council Member Antonosio,
Yes.
Council Member Bartholome,
Yes.
Council Member Collier,
Yes.
Council Member Placencia,
Yes.
Council Member Kilton.
Yes.
By your vote, the motion is adopted. Mr. Barton, you want to move into the fiscal year 21 TDT budget?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Appreciate that. James, can you go forward one? There you go. Thank you. So despite the effects of COVID and everything else we're working on, it is budget time for us at the county as well as for many of you. And so even at this time of year, typically I would have begin to bring you a tentative budget for the tourist development tax. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. My caveat to this one is, as I've said a couple times already, we're going to monitor the reopening of our economy and the impacts, particularly on the hospitality industry. And month to month, all the way up through when the county, the Board of County Commission typically adopts the full county budget in September. We'll be monitoring this month to month, and if we can see some favorable activity, we'll make some adjustments. But so this is our first draft. The first thing that I want to share with you is that we've made an assumption of about a 45% reduction over prior year. That's our operating scenario as we go into the first budget. I've coordinated this obviously within our finance and management, as well as conversations with Santiago and Bob Morrison as a representative of the hotel motel industry. And I'm hoping it's the most conservative and we can begin to adjust upwards, but I didn't want to be in a situation with us or any of our partners where we were too optimistic in our projection process, and then we had to ask people to make budget adjustments on the fly towards the end of the summer. So I am extremely hopeful that we can adjust upwards and not downwards as we move forward. That's the overarch. But with that 45% reduction, what I wanted to do is just walk through. This is a document that typically would be included at the very end. So the first 3-cent portion of the TDT, I want to walk through those allocations. The first is the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And one of the things you may notice, I've made some adjustments on my own authority, and I want to make sure that you're comfortable with them. But if you recall, we had a ratio sharing, particularly for Visit Tampa Bay and Sports Commission, and then the remainders. I've made some adjustments upwards because of if we do, in fact, realize a 45% reduction year over year on the total collections. I've upped the percentage that's available to Visit Tampa Bay to 80% of the net number, just to kind of keep our core marketing capabilities at a base level. And so that's just short of 8.4 million. The second category is what we call complementary visitor-based marketing. This has historically been our co-op, our visitor centers, and festivals. I've just grouped them now into a category because I think we need to have some more dialogue about what programs make sense in this post, on this recovery period, not post-COVID, but living with COVID. And so that's 900,000. The Sports Commission, I also increased slightly in their percentage to try and keep them in the range of their historical budgets. It's a little bit lower, but 842,000, almost 843. Here you'll see the rollover. The next one, you'll see the rollover of the Super Bowl money. So we've taken the current year allocations and rolled them over. And so we are still carrying $3 million in the budget, even with a 45% reduction. Actually, let me make this clear. We're not taking the Super Bowl commitment out of the projected annual collections for the year. Said another way, the $3 million in this budget is funded from our reserves. So by allocating $3 million in this budget, it's not an adverse impact to Visit Tampa Bay or Sports Commission or any of our other partners because it's coming out of our reserves. You also see the interlocal agreement with the Tampa Sports Authority, the up to amount $350,000 for the soccer complex. We also have rolled back in the Plant City contract for their sports complex. This $500,000 also comes out of reserves, so it does not have an adverse impact to our marketing partners. So those are the two exceptions, the Super Bowl and Plant City. So that's the first cut draft of the 3-cent allocations to our partners. The 4th and 5th we just show because I went ahead and projected forward to a typical budget document that we provide finance and budget. You guys typically have not seen us carrying the 4th and 5th, but I'm showing it here. So you'll see the 4th and the 5th show. There could have been a question about, well, with a 45% reduction and, the net numbers, what does that mean? You can see it here. So the assumption is basically 3.867 million per cent, because you can see it reflected in either the 4th or the 5th. The 6th cent is at the bottom. Again, we have shown the 45% reduction. The math still works for us to meet the matching with the city if they decide to move forward with additional improvements to the convention center. I've been in discussions with Una as well as Carol Post. We've all agreed to just do the same thing I've said several times now already, which is watch the industry month to month over the summer, see what the trend lines are going to be. But under even a 45% reduction, if the city chooses to move forward with some additional capital, we would have sufficient funds to match them on that. The Visit Tampa Bay amount, which is that supplemental marketing dollars that we had approved when we adopted the 6 cent, would be an additional $1 million to Visit Tampa Bay from marketing. And then that would leave about a little over $500,000 for cultural and attraction-based capital projects that we would have to vet, but that's the budgeted amount. So that is kind of a glimpse into the FY21 tourist development tax budget as we know it here in June 11th. Needless to say, we're going to watch it every reporting period. Usually the first week of the month is when the tax collector releases the data to us. That's when we'll see, the previous month's collections, which is also the previous to that month performance. So with that, I will stop here. I'm sure there may be some questions, but this is kind of the picture of what we see for next year with an assumption that we don't see any material positive movement in the tourist development tax. Again, this assumption would still be a rebound, but it's obviously not a rebound that it looks anything like last year's performance. Mr. Chairman, I would answer any questions of the members.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. I'm looking for hands for any questions. I don't see any hands at this point. I'll wait a minute, a second or two to see. Mr. Morrison, you recognize.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ron, one of the things that we haven't seen reflected, which probably is worthy of raising at this point, are the condition of our reserves. As you know, we went through a period in 08 and 09 when those reserves were not touched, and we consciously and intentionally went through establishing and building those reserves for the rainy day. All of us obviously, I think, would agree that we are in that period. It is raining, and then some. So maybe the first step is, with the allocations you've referred or you referenced in the recommended awards, where do we stand in terms of our reserve assessment?
Let me unmute. Yeah, I'll have to bring you a report on the reserves themselves. You are correct. We made a conscious choice to try and put some money away in the savings account over the last several years with extraordinary performance in the market. The only calls that we've made, and I'm doing this from memory, were some of the capital requests that we awarded on the sports complex. Clearly the $3 million for the Super Bowl and the Plant City project. So that's about 5.5 from memory that we've taken from reserves in the last 2 years. And again, doing this from memory, I recall our current reserves that are unrestricted are around $6 million. So we are sitting in a position of being able to deploy the reserves where we think that they would be helpful. And certainly my recommendation is as we roll into the next quarterly meeting, which will have given us a pretty good glimpse into a reopening dynamic, I think we could very well either deploy reserves to augment. Let's just say if this budget still looks semi-accurate at the time, we can use the reserves to augment budget allocation to these industries or these entities, and or special projects that we might decide, including the any additional marketing initiatives. So I'll be happy to, and it's a very appropriate question, to bring that into the conversation at the next TDC meeting, and because we'll also have a lot better market intelligence by then. By the way, I'm glad you asked. One other thing that I forgot to mention in my report is that we did release the $800,000 from the overage of the previous year, and the Board of County Commission approved that at the last meeting. And I know Santiago will talk about that in his report. That's something we would have done under normal circumstances, but certainly using that $800,000 to do some targeted marketing as the industry reopens was even more critical than we would have ever thought. And so I wanted to make sure the board was aware that we did that as well. And I know Santiago will talk a little bit about that as well. So yes, sir, I'll make that an integral part of our agenda for the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I think that, and Ron, thank you. I think that's going to help us. There's data from Smith Travel that talks about, that reflects in Hillsborough County. There's a metric we use that's used in the industry called revenue per available room, or RevPAR. In Tampa, St. Pete, in April, in 2019, RevPAR was around $117 per room. In 2020, RevPAR was around $17 per room. So I share that just to say we need to not delay too much longer in teeing up how we reposition and tell our story as a destination. So I look forward to that conversation and working through how what we can do on our side of the ledger to move the discussion forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Palencia, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple comments. One, I wanted to thank Ron and the staff for the work that they put into preparing this. I know it has not been easy when the view ahead is so cloudy and so uncertain. I also want to thank the Board of County Commissioners for voting the sixth cent into place here, because this is every little bit helps. I do want to comment on the assumption that was made, Ron, on the 45%. I don't mean to throw even more water on it, but I've got a concern that that it's going to be worse than that. And it's I'm looking at different markets around the country, and in particular urban markets that are have a heavy group orientation are really hurting the most. The markets that are coming back the fastest have a heavy leisure transient component, and it's primarily the coastal markets in California, in the Gulf Coast markets, the Atlantic Coast markets. Leisure markets in mountain areas are doing very well, but urban markets with larger conference and convention hotels are really suffering right now. And I guess my question is, have you looked at, I assume the 45% is what I would call a base case scenario. Have you looked at a worst case scenario where we don't do as well? If we start seeing hotels in the community begin to reduce rates in order to compete for business, it's going to be a real struggle to achieve the levels of revenues on which you're basing your tax income.
Yes, sir. I could not bring myself to do a worst case scenario. I don't know if that was mental health or mathematics, but we had discussions, obviously, with our finance and budgeting. I will admit to you that mentally I started my projection process much more pessimistic, but I was worried, that maybe I was clouding my pessimism in the process. So I did feel, however, as I've said before, we're going to be watching it month to month. And if we don't see any evidence of a reasonable rebound, I'm not even talking about a normal rebound, just some rebound, we're going to have to make adjustments to this projection. So the answer, very simply is I did not do a scenario worse than this one, although I contemplated it. And we'll just have to watch it month to month. And you're correct. I would agree with you completely. We're not a beach market. And if that's, those markets are rebounding differently than a traditional urban group and convention meetings market, we're going to have to watch that very carefully. Interestingly enough, certainly our summer months are slower. They're not our slowest, but they are slow. And Lou, to your point, and maybe the members would agree or disagree with what I'm about to say, but typically the performance that we do generate during the summer are some major social fraternal types of events that go into the convention center and others that kind of help smooth out the summer. And we'll see that impact probably in the numbers in the coming months. And that'll be an indicator as well, Lou, of exactly what you're talking about.
Ron, in conversations with a lot of the industry data collectors, and I'm talking about PricewaterhouseCoopers, HVS, CBRE, et cetera, leisure transient is definitely coming back the fastest, but nowhere near where it was pre-COVID. Corporate transient is coming back very, very slowly, and these are business travelers for the most part, and we're really seeing that at about 15 to 20% of where it was pre-COVID. Group is not expected to come back until late 2021 or early 2022 at the earliest in any meaningful way. And in focus groups that we have conducted with meeting planners around the country, roundtables with meeting planners, they have verified that they're not booking any business. In fact, they're not even canceling their accounts until they have to, until the last minute. So if there are groups on the books right now for the balance of 2020, I would submit to you that there's a very low likelihood that that business is going to materialize, and that's going to flow into 2021 as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I see no more hands here. Mr. Barton, are you done?
Quick question, Les. It's Joe here.
Okay.
Just so we can understand the pressure point on the 4th and 5th as it relates to the debt service, what's the threshold where we start having serious problem with those bonds for those two debt items?
Yeah, I would have to tell you, I'm not prepared to address that today. It's a good question. I'd defer that to Bonnie and her team. The 4th and the 5th, as you well know, is kind of their world related to the debt service. There are reserves, just as there are reserves in the 3 cent and the 6 cent. And so they have looked at those issues, but I think it'd be premature or probably even more inappropriate for me to answer that in detail, but we certainly can get that information to you in the next meeting. And needless to say, they're watching it closely because you.
Yeah,
you got those
I just kind of wondered.
obligations.
Yeah, I just wondered because, the chickens will come home to roost in areas like that at some point if things
If it's
pick up,
prolonged.
so.
Yep. I'm sorry I can't address it in detail, but I wouldn't want to ad lib.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor Castro, you recognize?
To Joe's point, and probably goes without saying, but say anyway, and I'm sure that Ron and Bonnie are looking at this with the restructuring of the bonds as well. Maybe an update on that to the board and to see if there's any savings we can realize in that area.
Be happy to do that, Mayor.
Okay. I see any more hands here. Bear with me a minute. Okay, I see no more hands. Mr. Barton, were you done?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Okay, we have to accept this recommended budget. Is there a motion to accept?
Castor, move to accept.
Motion by Mayor Castro, is there a second?
Placencia, second.
Since there's a second, see no further discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Chairman Miller,
Yes.
Councilmember Morrison,
Yes.
Councilmember Chilura,
Yes.
Councilmember Castor,
Yes.
Councilmember Antonesio,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartholome,
Yes.
Councilmember Collier,
Yes, and great job, Ron.
Councilmember Placencia,
Yes.
Councilmember Kilton.
Yes.
By your vote, the motion is adopted. Now moving to Tampa Bay Convention and Business Bureau, Mr. Corrada.
Good morning, Honorable Chairman, esteemed honorable members of the council, those watching at home, and county staff. Thank you, James and Tammy, for always making these presentations flawless. I think before I jump into my presentation, especially during these times, I think I need to offer lots of thanks. I need to thank Ron and the team for being so cooperative and collaborative with us, sharing information. Our county commission, as was mentioned, releasing $800,000 that will be specifically earmarked for recovery marketing, in addition to dollars we will be adding to supplement that. I want to thank the city for its work at the convention center and allowing us to continue to do business in a safe and secure way. Many kudos around the industry for the precautionary measures that are being taken at the convention center. And as well, my condolences to our industry, an industry that has been impacted more than any other industry, and not just here at home, but globally. As you know, we're a player not only at the local level, the state level, the national level, and the international level, and we are certainly aware of the impacts that have been suffered by our industry around the globe. So I'm going to jump into the presentation now. Some of it will be redundant, so I will move very, very quickly. James, if you could share the screen, I'd appreciate it. And next slide. You know, our numbers are a little bit different. These are Smith Travel Research numbers that are the second quarter, which are actual numbers for January, February, and March. And obviously, you don't see the dramatic impact to our county because it included just half of the month of March that was negative when we started to seeing the effects of the pandemic. This is Hillsborough County only, not Bay Area. And so you can see that at that time, the pandemic was affecting the U.S. A bit more and starting to affect other parts of Florida. And so you see there that Hillsborough County fared extremely well. Before I go on to the next slide, though, you know, I guess I want to add a little bit of light to maybe some of the you know, the worst case scenarios that have been mentioned. In April, we saw again, this is January, February, March numbers. In April, we saw occupancy at negative 69.8%, and that is the worst month, obviously, April. Remember April as the worst month. But then in May, occupancy was still negative, but at negative 56.1% in Hillsborough County. So we saw an increase of 13.7% in occupancy from April to May as the economy started to open up. And then on the revenue numbers, not RevPAR, I didn't want to get into RevPAR or ADR, although they saw some changes. Again, April, worst month ever. Revenues dropped 84.7% in April. Lots of properties closed. Again, lots of our employees suffering, our neighbors that we employ in the industry. But then in May, again, not great, but negative 72.6%. So an increase of 12.1% in revenue. So again, seeing slow change trending in the right direction. And, you know, I'm a marketer, so I've got to look at, you know, the positives as well as the negatives. And so that's a good sign that occupancy is trending and revenues trending in the right direction. Smith Travel Research recently released a report that covered a bridge week between May and June. And out of the 25 largest destinations in America, only 6 had seen occupancy levels of over 40%. New York was number 1, Virginia Beach, Norfolk area number 2, and Tampa St. Pete number 3. So again, we've done a lot of work over the last few years to not be a one-trick pony as far as conventions and groups and conventions and groups. And we really have affected the leisure tourist transient needle. And so not a rosy picture, but gradually getting better. And we're very, very focused on you know, making it better. So next slide, please. If we look at our sub-markets, you see downtown, January, February, March numbers. Again, the March impact to those numbers. Next slide, please. East Tampa, actually, East Tampa wasn't as negatively affected on revenue, but was on RevPAR, which is interesting. And they were still holding a percentage of occupancy over 72 for January, February, March, even with the downslide in March. Next slide, please. North Tampa Bush, similar effects as the downtown slide. And then if you get into the next and the last submarket, West Shore, you will see, again, significant impacts due to the March numbers. And, you know, again, you know, heavily hit on the RevPAR as well as occupancy numbers. And, you know, the more difficult part of the conversation here is that you're comparing record-setting quarters from prior years to a very abnormal situation that we've encountered with the months of March, April, and we're seeing May and June as well. So again, West Shore performance down because of the March effect. If we can go on to the next slide, please. County taxable revenue, which is apples to apples, oranges to oranges. This is taxable revenue coming into our hotels And obviously for our quarter two, it's January, February, March, but these were collections that were not affected by COVID-19 because they were the collections on the property real-time December, January, February. So you see how well the year, that quarter was going compared to the last quarter. Next slide, please. And then bed tax collections, as Ron most appropriately identified, it's not an apples to apples comparison. We started collecting that 6 cents August, September of last year. But you see again for bed tax collections, December, January, February, which translates to our January, February, March numbers, you see there a skewed number again because of the 6 cent. And what foresight, right, to pass that 6 cent collection last year, because most undoubtedly we won't hit 600 million in taxable revenue in this calendar year, or possibly even the next. So timing really was on our side, and lots of great thinking. Next slide, please, James. Again, this is year to date on taxable revenue, and these are collections September through March. Obviously, that yellow line will start to dip as we encounter the negative revenue numbers for March, April, May, and whatever other months continue to trend negatively. But again,
they'll be below the 31.5, Santiago.
I'm sorry?
They will be below the 31.5 at the bottom of your screen coming up in May, June, and July.
We'll see. We'll see. Lots of crystal balls out there, Lou. I hope some are clouded, so we'll see. Yeah, there will be some significant dips. You've already gotten a preview of that with the April collections and half of March looking so dire. So Lou, you're right. I'm just, again, I'm going to be very positive, as I was with the 600 million taxable revenue and 6 cents so many years ago. So I'm going to continue to stay as positive as I can, but not crazy positive. Next slide, please. Again, bed tax collections through February, September through February, our fiscal year. This is our second quarter, but going back to the beginning of the fiscal. So again, obviously record-setting pace on bed tax collections, and of course the added 6 cent that we started collecting back in August, which makes a bigger skew compared to 2019 for right now. Next slide. Believe it or not, even with a very reduced staff, we've been very, very active we were very active during the second quarter and continue to be very active. Lou mentioned cancellations that may become reality. I can tell you that right now, and I had this report created for me just yesterday, on the books through September, we have 36 still events that we've been engaged in that are still holding, and they may cancel according to Lou. 6 of those being citywides, and 1 with projected attendees of about 6,000 attendees. So again, we'll see how all of these play out. Back to Lou, yes, we've had cancellations the closer the dates get. These 36 through September as of yesterday will hold, but staying extremely busy. And we're finding a nice trend, folks not just canceling, but trying to reschedule and postpone and work with us. We've stayed very, very close to our clients, making sure that there are opportunities either in the very near future or maybe even the distant future. Next slide, please. And believe it or not, lots of new partners. And even though some of our partners have been suffering and we have not been out there collecting private revenues, many of them who believe in what we stand for and what we do for our community have been actually supporting us even through the pandemic, which is just amazing. And we so appreciate that. Next slide. And media exposure continues to be very, very good. And you'll see later on in the presentation that we are getting a lot of attention, not only here in the state, but as well as the rest of the country. We're very, very engaged with a number of entities out there beyond, Hillsborough County. So lots of attention as far as media placements through the second quarter and actually continuing very well through the third quarter. Next slide, please. And obviously in the second quarter, this has not happened in the third quarter. Remember, this is through March. We were still very, very busy in market as well as out of market. And it's nice to see that some virtual FAMs are going on. Like we're having a virtual meeting, now we're having virtual FAMs, as well as we're starting to see even some traveling to market for in-market, live and personal FAMs. So again, very, very optimistic about how that may continue to evolve. Next slide. So some quick COVID-19 updates. As soon as we started to see the writing on the wall in early March, actually late February, early March, we quickly pivoted. Next slide, James. From purely a selling and marketing organization to leading. And we started galvanizing partnerships. We started reaching out to all of our affected partners. We started marketing their virtual experiences with, again, a very, very sensitive reaction to what was going on. In fact, you'll see some of the messaging. And we created a number of aspirational videos at the time. In fact, we host every Friday a regional PR call with about 10 other DMOs from the Gulf Coast. So we're able to assess their situations and how they're handling the situations. And we've hosted a number of webinars. In fact, we were one of the first to get out with Tampa General Hospital to do a webinar, Fact from Fear, on COVID-19. We're in fact doing another webinar, as I know our Hillsborough County Hotel Motel Association is doing with Tampa General Hospital on reopening safely. We also hosted a webinar with Expedia, and we wanted our webinars to have impact. You know, there were so many out there with the crystal balls and the research, and we were participating in all of those, but we really wanted ours to, hit home and how we're handling what's happening here locally. So next slide, please. So one of the things, again, reacting to physical distancing, social distancing, we went ahead and animated our logo. And then again, with our partners, again, pro bono, creating some very aspirational videos. The next video will probably stream in a choppy way, but you can go to any of our social media sites, see that video as part of other videos that we've done with some of our local partners. So if you could go on to the next one.
We are stronger together. In the warm air, the Gulf breezes. By the sparkling water as the sun slowly sets. The pirates shout ahoy, and treasure awaits. Where gentle manatees swim past timeless minarets, with adventures to discover in historic districts with diversity and charm. In our community by the bay, to make memories beyond measure when you return, because we are all stronger together. Where hope always shines, in the hip urban heart of Florida's Gulf Coast meets. Ready for you in Tampa Bay, Florida's most resilient destination.
And it's interesting, we are hearing that, this destination is very resilient. As far as some of the urban centers in Florida, probably one of the more attractive urban centers to come back to. When you think about the pandemic and how it's raged in South Florida, and you think about its effects over in the Orlando area, no, correct, not a beachfront destination, but certainly an urban safe destination. And obviously some of our social distancing infographics have gone viral because we've played up, our personality, our character. Next slide, please. And again, some of the recent coverage that we have been involved in as a tourism leader, not only here locally, but covered by meetings groups and others on how we are working to, again, return meetings and conventions and associations to the destination. Next slide, please. We've created a new Facebook group for Tampa Bay Tourism and Hospitality. In fact, please visit it. Again, with this very positive message of together, we're going to get the industry back on our feet and back to a record-setting pace here, hopefully sooner rather than later. And then next slide, please. We launched a Travel Agent Academy. We're finding that travel agencies, OTAs, and others will be looking to DMOs for leadership and training and information. And as of 3/21, we had almost 500 participants enrolled in the online training program. So again, shifting with the changing times on new and relevant information for our partners and friends that want to keep moving forward. And then the next slide. Believe that is it. Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Corrada. I'm checking now to see if there are any questions from anyone. And at this point, I don't see any hands for any questions. So thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you, sir.
Let's make a motion to adopt this presentation. Is there a motion to adopt the presentation?
This is by Morrison. So move.
Motion by Morrison. Mr. Morrison, is there a second?
I'll second it, Councilor.
Second by the mayor. See no further discussion. Please call the roll.
Chairman Miller,
Yes.
Councilmember Morrison,
Yes.
Councilmember Chilura,
Yes.
Councilmember Castor,
Yes.
Councilmember Antonesio,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartholome,
Yes.
Councilmember Collier,
Yes.
Councilmember Placencia,
Yes.
Councilmember Kilton.
Yes.
By your vote, the motion is adopted. Is there any other general business discussions that we have to have today?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, it's Ron Barton.
Yes, sir.
We, at the end here as well, Donna McBride has joined us from the STRAS, and she asked if she could give the TDC a brief update on kind of the reopening conversations and what's going on at the STRAS. So appreciate if we could allow her some time to brief the board.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you. I really appreciate it. We want you to know that the STRAS Center is grateful for your leadership and for helping to develop the tourism economy in Hillsborough County and truly beyond. We look forward to the day we can wholeheartedly say that we got through this together, and we really mean that. We want to give you a brief update on how the STRAS is moving forward, kind of a state of the STRAS thing. And as you know, over the past 365 days a year, we work side by side with you, and we're very proud of that fact. And the STRAS works with the hotels and the restaurants and leisure and business tourism to try to be sure that we're helping to stimulate the economy and helping to try to be a part of that crown that really does make Tampa attractive and for business and leisure tourism. So I can tell you that, of course, the STRAS closed down on March 13th. And like performing arts centers all across the nation, we probably were the first types of venues to close, and we'll probably be the last to come back. However, just as Santiago shared, at this point in time, you go from sales to trying to lead. And I think we're very fortunate in the fact that we have Ms. Lisi and Mr. Shepard, who are leading national agendas to try to remedy our industry and bring it back on board as fast as possible. I'll tell you that Ms. Lisi, and some of you know this, for a number of years, she's been on the board of directors of the Broadway League, which is our national agency that works with the companies in New York and building the touring companies that go out across the nation. And one of the things with that and rebuilding, which that will probably be our longest term phase of trying to bring the STRAS back. But having leaders like Judy there on behalf of Hillsborough County and the nation, that's going to put us in the forefront of bringing that industry back. Of course, it's based in New York, which is a very, very critical point in our country right now. The tours are based on once Broadway comes back in New York, which it has to be completely rebuilt, rehearsed, and scheduled all over again, then the tours will begin to rebuild. And that's a pretty lengthy process, but they're as eager to get back to it as anybody. So the dangers there, of course, with the touring is that you don't want to start having thousands and thousands of these actors and performers and cast and crew going back and forth across the country and possibly making the pandemic worse or getting them sick. So, you know, it's all got to be done with rebuilding the industry, taking special concerns to mitigation for individuals that are not only the resources, and then the individuals also inside the venues. And I can tell you that Ms. Lisi has also been working with the 5 major performing arts centers in the state of Florida, for which you should be proud. The STRAS is the largest. We're actually the largest cultural institution in the state. So we've been working probably since, I would say, February, advocating for the types of assistance that we needed to come down from the federal government with our representatives, and made some headway. We believe in the CARES Act, and then did a lot of work in trying to help with the extensions on the paycheck protection programs and a lot of the adaptations that needed to be done once the government began to roll out some assistance. So, and we hope that, you know, at some point we will all benefit in the best possible ways from the money that is coming down. Mr. Shepard is leading a national group of performing arts venues looking at reopening and caring for and implementing mitigation for these types of venues. You look at the STRAS, we've got five theaters where we're going to put anywhere from 3,000 people shoulder to shoulder. So looking at safe distancing and that type of thing is very critical to our industry, because it's built, especially as these performing arts centers across the nation are nonprofits. The touring companies work with the performing arts centers, and they're built on having a capacity business model to be feasible. So the distancing thing is a very, very big challenge. I can tell you one thing, that the STRAS is coming forth with a phased reopening plan. And in the first phase, one of the things that we did was we pivoted all our community programs, because we felt like that was the most important thing, the education programs and keeping people engaged and making sure that, especially, for example, like our high school seniors had the opportunity to perform something similar to what would have been their final high school play or their performance or whatever. And our work with the veterans, we felt like it was, you know, our veterans in the community were the last people on earth who needed to be isolated. And so we pivoted all those programs so that we could keep them engaged and keep all those services flowing. And that was a part of a national project that's continuing. The second phase, we're looking at opening, you know, we had just completed an outdoor stage, and then we had SIP, the little cantina down on the Riverwalk. So we are at a point where we're going to start some outdoor events to help the community come back together and encourage people as safely as possible to enjoy their community and their culture. And we're working with a number of local artists to try to put things together. And then we have what we call a programming think tank that is looking at how to get audiences back into the theaters and how to build the events from smaller to larger to get us to the point of bringing Broadway back in. Of course, there's a whole level of mitigation that has to happen. But one thing, for example, we may take smaller events and put them in the larger theaters so that we can accomplish some distancing and still get as close to a feasible capacity as we can. I can tell you that probably we're looking at Broadway coming back, which is our big event. We do it year round. We have 2 seasons of Broadway. We're looking at possibly those events coming back in December. It was originally projected that would be January. So like Santiago, we're all trying to be extremely conservative, but we're also being very hopeful and doing all we can to help the industries come together to get this going. Now, because our resources are 100% people, we have to be very careful in doing that. So we are going to keep an eye on the trends and the data out there about the disease. Our first and foremost concern is the people in our community and the people in our industry. And we have to be very, very careful. And when we're looking at 435,000 square feet of mitigation protocols, that's going to be a heavy lift. But we are doing our best at it. And we have truly appreciated the TDC's help all along the way. One of the things that we wanted to ask of you at this meeting is, we are a tourism marketing partner with Visit Tampa Bay, and we have a grant of $520,000 for this fiscal year. And of course, as the industry shut down and the marketing began to fall off, and we also closed down capital projects, we know we're not going to hit that mark in tourism marketing for this fiscal year. And we would like to ask that the TDC consider freeing up the remainder of that award to be used by the Strass Center for critical operations. And I can tell you right now, with the building sealed up and minimal operations trying to contain the state-of-the-art facility and all the valuable artworks inside, and no staff on site, we're running at about $1.5 million a month. For example, our April power bill, which we know May, June, July, and August is going to be worse. Our April power bill was $24,000, a little over that. So we're running a very tight ship, but we desperately, desperately need our partners to jump in and help us. And we're looking for all the possible ways that this can be put together. And so we hope that quite possibly you would consider freeing up the remainder of our award to be used for vital operations.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Barton, you want to address that?
So for the TDC, we're obviously starting conversations with all of our attractions. The zoos engaged the county, the convention center in the city of Tampa has engaged us, the aquarium. And so we're going to be looking at the totality of the circumstances. So at this juncture, we're not in a position to make any recommendation to the TDC, but I would say this. One of the things that we have done to help the Straz and others is we have, many of you know, we have an allocation of what's called the Seminole Gaming money, Seminole Gaming funds. And those funds are for the primary venues we're talking about, the Straz, the aquarium, the zoo, the History Center, Mosey. And we made a policy decision, despite the fact that the venues all had to close, to continue to release the Seminole Gaming funds, which are very significant. Each of the entities probably get anywhere between $300,000 and $600,000, depending on the entity. And so we've made the decision to go ahead and keep releasing those Seminole Gaming funds to help those venues with their operating issues, even though they were closed. And some are obviously still looking at the issue of how to reopen. So that's just additional background. to the conversation. But at this juncture, we're not prepared to make any recommendation to the board on that request. And we'll be looking and working with each of them, including the STRAS, to look at a kind of a total picture of how we can assist. And that's my update on that.
Okay.
And that's all we have for the agenda.
Okay. Is any other general discussion by anyone? Mr. Barton, will we be having another meeting before November?
Oh, yes, sir. So our normal, we'll get back on normal schedule now. So our next one is in July. Our next meeting will be in July, which will be timely, not only for the budget discussions, but for many of the questions that were asked today, including the reserves and debt service updates and things like that. So we will be back on our normal schedule. I will make sure we get out to you reminders. I know we all just kind of phased out here over the last couple of months. We'll make sure these meetings are still on your schedule. We'll stick with virtual for the time being. So yes, sir, we'll have a meeting well before the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. All right, thank you. Seeing no further discussion, let me thank everyone for being on the call today. We'll be back again, like Mr. Barton said, sometime in July. So I ask you to stay safe, stay tuned, and stay healthy. So with that being said, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.